traditional energy resources from its scope, like coal or oil and gas. There is no basis, legal or otherwise, for the department's continued view that the law is limited to forestry and surface leases. AT&I recommends that the committee consider clarifying amendments to ITARA that will eliminate the agency-imposed obstacles to tribal participation. At a minimum, AT&I recommends 3 changes. The first is to eliminate the Secretary's discretion in Section 203A of the law to dissuade or reject tribes from submitting trust asset management agreements. The language should be revised to eliminate the initial application requirement. Tribes should be able to submit proposed agreements for the Secretary's consideration without that initial step. Second, the committee should address the department's unfounded interpretation that only forest resources and surface leases are includable in trust asset agreements. The department's misguided interpretation of the law has prevented Indian country from utilizing ITARA to its full potential. AT&I will work with the committee on language to ensure that Indian tribes can include the full breadth of tribal trust resources in trust asset agreements as we originally intended. Finally, any amendments should make the demonstration project entitled to permanent. In 2024, AT&I adopted Resolution 2425, which urged the Secretary to make the demonstration project permanent, and the National Congress of American Indians adopted this resolution at its 2024 annual convention. Despite these calls for the Secretary to administratively extend the program, no action has been taken to date. AT&I is grateful for the subcommittee holding today's hearing. We look forward to working with the committee on issues related to ITARA. This concludes my testimony, and I will be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Scholes-Oliver, for that testimony. The chairman will now recognize members for 5 minutes of questions each, and I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Scholes-Oliver, can you talk to me a little bit about, your testimony is really interesting. My sense is that the problem is not necessarily in the language of ITARA, but the way that it's being implemented by the BIA. Is that a fair characterization?
That is correct. The issue is that there's a narrow view of the definition of the trust assets.
Do you know why that would be? Or is there a reason given, I should say?
Not to my knowledge. It certainly wasn't intended in the original language of the text of the bill. And we understand that trust assets can be widely diverse, and AT&I is committed to working with the committee to developing and further refining that definition.
Okay. So part of that suggested fix might be making it clear what the definition of those assets is then, that it's broad, that it's not necessarily narrow as the BIA seems to have interpreted it.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kuppelman, you mentioned that ITARA was intended to empower tribes. I think that's right. That's a great point, but it seems to not be doing that with 2 exceptions here. One of the things that you mentioned was that there's little knowledge of ITARA, and that many tribes are unaware of those opportunities that comes with ITARA. And then, of course, as we're hearing today, those who are aware of it and do apply face lots of confusing and unnecessary restrictions. What should Congress and the Department of the Interior do to improve outreach with respect to ITARA? Is there a role that could be done there to let tribes know that this is an option?
I think every region,
if you could hit your mic real quick.
Every region within the timber area should be notified where there's caucuses of tribes that come together to be informed of what exactly ITARA is, what its intent is, how all these tribes see it moving forward. I think that's the best way to get the word out and to get some feedback from tribes on how it should work.
Mr. Kuppelman, if you could change 2 or 3 things about Atara, just if you could insert the language in the statute or direct the BIA to do 2 or 3 things. Can you name 2 or 3 things just off the top of your head that would be most useful, most productive?
Well, I think the first thing is follow through. I know we have ITARA, and the follow through on the side of the BIA to ensure that it's getting done and passed down to tribes would be the first thing. The second thing is to work with tribes on creating the best format so that tribes can succeed with this. The third thing is ensuring that the dollars to manage and do this work that was formerly done by the BIA be given to tribes as well, because that's a part of it, right? Those are the big 3 that I think need to occur.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Gobin, you mentioned the narrow and cramped interpretation of ITARA, and you talked about the importance of removing roadblocks. Could you give me a couple examples of what are concrete roadblocks that, in your experience, you've seen thrown up with respect to this process?
Our reservation consists of 22,000 acres. Of that, much of it is checkerboarded through various policies, procedures through history, and has went out of trust into non-Indian ownership, non-member ownership. So we have, it's like a 3-sided reservation. One side is completely bordering the water. So as such, you go along, you have tribal property, and then you have upland non-Indian property. Throughout all of that process, though, never has the tribe sold its tidelands, never has it relinquished right to the tidelands. And so it creates a dispute at time. Oftentimes growing up as a kid, more so back then, we were told we were trespassing on our own reservation and had to deal with that when we fished commercially, often beach seine, so it's from the shore. So then you're limited by where you can actually fish anymore because now bulkheads have been placed in place there, and you lose your access to that shoreline at various stages of the tide. Those are the major things that you see. Through time, the design of bulkheads and that has changed, and there's far more hard armoring on the shoreline than ever before. And we want to work with people to redesign, reshape what that shoreline looks like while still protecting the habitat and the environments there and still enjoying the use of the beach.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gobin. I appreciate that. Thank you, witnesses, for your testimony. My time has expired, and I yield back. I will now recognize Ranking Member Teresa Ledger-Fernandez for 5 minutes. Ranking Member Ledger-Fernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it strikes me that 10 years is both a long time and not a long time, right? And that sort of this law was passed in 2016, apparently probably signed into law by Obama. And then in about 2017, it took, the regulations looks like were passed. And then the process began for applying. And right now, you know, we went through another 4 years of the Biden administration. Now we're back on the Trump administration, and we only have 4 tribes participating. And I need to give it up to Oregon, because 3 of them are in Oregon and 1 of them is in Washington. And so clearly there has been a failure of communication so that this is not more widespread. And I'm wondering if any of you, maybe I'll go to you, Ms. Oliver, to give a sense, because you were there when the idea of this sparked excitement. What can we do so that more tribes can learn of the opportunity? I think I checked, and it looks like we might have less than 10 actually applying, and we've heard why not, but what is it that we need to do to expand its breadth outside of the beautiful Pacific Northwest?
Thank you for that question. And to clarify, I should have mentioned I've only been in this position for 2 years, so I wasn't there at the beginning, but that doesn't mean that I'm not
Aware.
excited about this bill. So I think one of the things that we can do has been mentioned by my counterparts and tribal leaders here. One is to eliminate the initial application requirement under 203A. There's an inherent sort of way to sort of not self-select, but kind of hand-pick tribes that are able to participate in the program. That may be an unintended consequence, but I think elimination of that requirement might open up the opportunities for other tribes to participate.
So it also strikes me that one of them is an issue, and we went across this with law enforcement, with 638 contracts compacting, that sometimes it's really the tribes who have more capacity, they're able to do that. And so it's like if you have more resources and capacity, you're able to take advantage where other tribes aren't. And it just strikes me, I was looking at some of the numbers that for tribal forest lands receive only 40 cents for every dollar allocated to the National Forest Service lands. Tribes and BIA manage twice as many acres per forestry staff member compared. So you guys are doing a whole lot with less. And we had both Mr. Desautels, President Caporaman, and President Desautels talk about the fact that you needed more resources, right? Because it becomes, if we don't fund the programs, then when you take it over, even if you were then able to contract those down, you're not bringing enough money down. Are you concerned about that, that if we don't fund these programs when you go to take them over, or if we say as part of the project, we need to make sure that you can push those resources down. What is that sort of like tension that you have with regards to that? I'll start with President Desautels.
Well, I think that's a very important consideration, and I think a lack of information in the difference between what an Indian Trust Asset Management Plan is and what those flexibilities are versus what a traditional 638 contract mechanism is are important for tribes to understand. And again, the funding is equally important because, I mean, it makes no sense to develop a plan if you don't have funding to then implement that plan, because the tribe's long-term objectives are to do that on-the-ground resource management, to improve conditions and resources for access to their tribal membership. So without a ready funding source, and I think tribes are unsure about what that funding mechanism would be. They're familiar with the 638 because we've used it for the last 3 decades, but for ITARA, that's a little unclear.
Right, and so we need to put that in the language. And looking at the public law, you're right, it does not limit. But President Caporaman, if you can answer the question, and then I'll yield back.
Yeah, I think what my colleague here has said really hits it on the head. I mean, if the BIA is not there to do that trust responsibility, the tribe's going to take that on and ensure that that work gets done and manage those lands, those resources, and do all those things. Then in effect, the tribe itself takes on that trust responsibility to do that work for the landowners. So then in order to do that work, we need those funds to pull that off. And whether that's 638 contracting or another format, they go hand in hand. And I think that's going to be the big kicker in how this moves forward. And nowadays, for us to find a forester out there, I mean, we're undermanned as it is to do the work we have to do, and underfunded to do the work we have to do as well. So, yeah, they both go hand in hand.
Okay, thank you very much, and I appreciate your answers, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Ledger-Fernandez. The chair now recognizes Mr. Kennedy from Utah for 5 minutes. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an honor to be here with you and the committee, and thanks for those witnesses that took all the time to come to Washington, D.C. We're grateful to have you here. And I particularly appreciate that you've pointed out a problem and you've also offered solutions. Each one of you in your written testimony have offered us opportunities for us to step in and try to help. So thank you for that. Many times we have people pointing out problems, but they're unwilling to give us options for solutions, so thank you. I'm interested, Mr. Gobin, in your testimony. I wanted, just for clarification's sake, Snoqualmie Falls is part of your ancestral heritage or not?
In our generally accustomed areas.
Yeah, I've been there many times. It's a beautiful area. And in fact, one of the things, and I'm interested overall with all four of you, is why the Bureau of Indian Affairs is not willing to give you the access to the full benefit of what this 10 years ago law was passed, what it was supposed to do. It's almost like the BIA has an intent to not execute on the intent behind our law, that they don't really want you to have full power. And I'm very supportive of states, and in this case, the tribes, of executing their full power. So, Mr. Gobin, I'm curious, and this is where I'm interested, because in your written testimony, thank you for doing that, you said, quote, "Today the shoreline is studded with marinas, parking lots, public buildings, houses, cabins, docks, bulkheads, and beach access stairways, causing negative impact on shorelines on the reservation and throughout Puget Sound." I've been to those areas. They're beautiful areas. And what I'm concerned about is that the BIA is more interested in those boats and marinas and docks than they are in the tribal rights to use those properties in the ways that ancestrally you're able to. Can you give me an opinion that you have about why is the BIA not helping you to carry forward the full intent of the law? Does it have anything to do with the private property rights of these boats and marinas and docks?
Yes, certainly I can. And I do have an opinion. I believe that they're misreading the document because it uses examples of forestry or land leases. Like, to them, it must imply that it only belongs to that. But this is an Indian trust asset management. And so, as such, when we go back to the executive order establishing our reservation, which includes all of the tidelands to the low water mark, those are held in trust by the United States government for the benefit of the tribe. You do an instant Google search of what is a trust asset for tribes. Number one is land held in trust for the tribe. Number one. So I'm not sure why they're not including that. It makes no sense to us, but it needs to be changed and reaffirmed. If they can't determine the intent by themselves, I would ask that the committee establish what that is and clearly identify what that is and make it permanent.
Thank you for that answer, and it does reflect the land being held in trust, almost like you can't handle it yourself. We'll handle it for you and give you whatever ancillary benefits we get around to. It seems like an inferior position that you're put in as a result of this somewhat parental relationship that the federal government is putting you in. Would you characterize it that way or in some other way?
I think you did it very well. It's the paternal aspect of looking out for this. Or maybe it's the lack of resources that they have and not willing to expand it further.
Thank you for that. I'm really interested in eliminating that parental relationship. I believe you and your people are more than capable of handling these. We'll go to, for a moment then, Ms. Amber Schultz-Oliver. Thank you very much for being here. And you recommended that the demonstration project be made permanent. And I'm, in fact, interested in that as well. I think that could be good policy. Tell me how you and ADNI came up with that recommendation.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things it would do is it would expand more tribes to be able to take advantage of this act. As we heard testimony, not very many have been able to submit their plans and get their plans approved. Yeah, I think, and it also allows for longer term management rather than just a short 10-year period.
Thank you for that answer. Mr. Chair, I'll just finish just by saying it seems like there's an intentional misreading of this law, that the Bureau has no interest really in these people being able to manage. And the law, as far as I've been led to believe, it's fairly clear, but the Bureau does not want to allow it to be read in that clarity. So whatever I and we can do to help. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the time to ask these questions, but I'm concerned about 10 years and only 2 tribes being allowed to do anything with this law, which seems to be fairly clear on its face. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. The chair now recognizes Ms. Hoyle from Oregon for 5 minutes. Ms. Hoyle.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony. I have the great honor to represent 4 tribal nations, 2 of which, the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Indians and the Coquel, have been, were the first 2 tribes in the country to have approved Indian Trust Asset Management Plans. In the Pacific Northwest, we have been leading the way on forest management, and I'm not going to ask you to assign intent or an explanation to what the BIA is doing. What I am going to ask you, specifically Mr. DeSoto, I'd like you to share some of the positive benefits from these agreements, both for the tribes and then also for the surrounding communities.
Sure, thank you for the question. So from the tribal perspective, under an approved trust asset management plan, they have more discretion on setting priorities, establishing timelines, and really circumventing some of those bureaucratic processes that would exist if those were BIA-approved plans. So that's particularly beneficial for some of the smaller tribes that maybe have smaller acreages to manage, smaller staff and capacity to deal with those types of NEPA documents, which I'm sure this committee knows are very complicated. So I think that provides a lot of flexibility that allows implementation to flow much easier. It also allows them to be more flexible if there's shifting priorities. So for a Cawville example, extensive amount of wildfire on our reservation over the last decade, and we could shift what our priorities were and what forest health treatments would be done first versus next. And then from a cross-jurisdictional co-management type approach, it gives them the ability to work with their neighbors more flexibly. So under state regulations, things move faster. Private industry regulated by the state can move faster. So really, we're just looking at our federal partners at that point. What can we do collectively across the landscape to mitigate risk, to improve forest health and management, to improve those other resource benefits that are critical for everybody in our communities: clean water, clean air, healthy landscapes. So I think those are tools that are very, very valuable when you have more flexibility from a management perspective.
Thank you, and I think we spoke earlier about the potential of having field hearings, certainly with the ONC lands in Oregon, and having examples of tribal nations that have used the Indian Trust Asset Management Plan with the checkerboard pattern, so we can see forests managed by tribes next to forests managed by the Forest Service and the BLM and private lands, and where our wildfires go. I think it's clear that tribes manage for future generations and in a holistic nature. Certainly with millennia of experience relying on tribes for co-management or assigning good neighbor authority, or this program is absolutely the most important thing we can do. And I'm hoping I can get my colleagues to also agree to field hearings. Now, in your testimony, you discussed the 2023 Indian Forest Asset Management Team report that included recommendations for improving management of Indian forests. How can the committee support the work to implement those recommendations?
Well, I think first, holding an oversight hearing would be very beneficial. While you've seen the report, I'm sure you see lots of reports on a daily basis, so having an opportunity to discuss those issues, what the recommendations of the report were, and how we can pass policy or legislative bills that would be beneficial in addressing some of those issues. That would include management perspectives, funding limitations or challenges, and a vast array of other things. Again, several hundred recommendations from the report. But I know that we requested the oversight hearing. We tried to schedule a field hearing because there's just not a replication that we can bring here that shows you what things look like on the ground. So to the extent the committee is willing, we'd love to have you somewhere out west, I think would be a good example, to show you some of the work that's happening on the ground, some of the impacts that are happening from wildfires, insect and disease, and some of the tools that tribes are using to help mitigate that.
Great, I absolutely agree. And again, I know that the Pacific Northwest is leading the way, and being able to have our colleagues come out and see what's happening there. And again, figuring out solutions to make sure that we're being as efficient as possible in managing our forests would be beneficial for everyone. Thank you so much for your answering the questions.
The gentlelady yields back. Thank you very much. The chairman now recognizes the member from Washington, Ms. Randall, for 5 minutes of questions. Ms. Randall.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to all of you here before us sharing your experience with the subcommittee so that we can better support this incredible work that you're doing. President Kapoman, you mentioned a little bit of this in your testimony, but I'm wondering if you can expand some about the importance of asserting greater self-governance over the issues directly impacting areas like forestry. Why is it so important?
Well, first off, the most important part is that all of us tribes, have lived in these areas, since the beginning of time, and we know how to manage the resource, whether it be the water, fish, timber, land, air, all of these things. We know how to do this, and how that impacts our tribal members on the ground every day is what matters, not just for today, but for those yet unborn. That's the critical piece for all of us. And how we do that, that's been the mystery for us working with federal agencies, is how do we put that piece together to make that happen? For at least in Quinault's case, we've had a relationship with the federal government for 170 years, and it's weighted more towards a bad relationship more than it is a good relationship. We want to turn that around. The best way to turn that around is to allow us the inherent right to govern our resources in a way that we feel is best, because that's what works. That's what truly works. And you come down and you look at our reservation and you see how some of the things we've implemented there to protect habitat, to protect land. It truly is working for us, and that's the model. Those are some of the models we would like to see go forth. And we've recommended some of those things in this document here as a way to get this to the next stage. And so I hope the committee really considers keeping this on as a project that is not just a project, but something that is there and that tribes can use, and no longer a demonstration project, but something that's done. So that's what we'd like to see.
Thank you. And, as we have heard that you're still in the process of finalizing the Indian Trust Asset Management Plan under ITARA. Can you speak a little bit to the successes, but also the ongoing challenges you faced as you navigate this process?
Yeah, I think a lot of the challenges have been, like I said, the follow-through from the BIA on how we should do this. The communication piece, it seems to me like there's a force, the BIA's the force. It's been done a certain way for so many years. It's been done this way by the BIA that there's like an ownership. There's a fear of letting go and letting tribes do what we've done. And I think that's what's been holding this up, and how we get beyond that is we have more hearings like this. We have some action plans that come out of this that guide us to a more complete project.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Schultz-Oliver, in just a few seconds, can you touch on how the trust asset management plans can be a strategic tool for climate resilience, which is such an important issue for, I know, those of us on the Olympic Peninsula.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think one of the key elements of the plans is that tribes can elevate their priorities, and many of our tribes, especially in the 18I region, do have an eye towards protecting that's not protecting our climate, but have an eye to making sure that our resources are protected from the impacts of any climate actions.
The gentlelady yields back. I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and also my colleagues, members, for their questions. Members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask that you please respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. on Friday, February 28, 2025. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these questions. If there is no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.